So we're going to play a little bit. You'll notice that the bulletin doesn't have the primary passage this week because we're going to play a little game and see how quickly you can figure it out. So, what book am I? Okay? It is only 4 chapters and it's barely 6 pages in my Bible, and that includes the commentary. Okay? It says, conquering the promised land is in the recent past. Time before Samuel and the beginning of the kings of Israel, and considered by some to be the Jewish Dark Ages. And I purposely tried to pick ones that you wouldn't guess too easily, so these are some harder clues. Anybody have a guess where we're going? Remember, it's Mother's Day, it's about a mom. That's a clue. We're in the book of Ruth, okay? And we're not going to be talking about the namesake of the book today. We're going to be talking about Naomi, okay? And so let me read the first 5 verses to kind of kick us off on what we're going to go over today. It says now in Ruth chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, it says, now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled, so right during the book of Judges time frame, that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And that Moab will play a part in this discussion today. It says the name of the man was Elimelech, the name of his wife was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathrites of Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to the country of Moab. Remember, the Moabites, they were supposed to get rid of. The Moabites they weren't even supposed to intermix with the Moabites. Okay? Keep that in mind as we go through this story. It says, then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. Now they took wives of the women of Moab. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so the woman survived her 2 sons and her husband. Okay, that's probably one of the saddest openings to a book of the Bible that we have. Job might have it beat a little bit, but the first 5 verses of the book of Ruth. And how many people, when they read a book, sometimes if it doesn't catch your fancy, you don't even continue? Well, Ruth might be kind of a book like that. You start reading something like this, you may not want to finish it, but it's the Bible, so you better. All right? So, I want to sum up the first 5 verses of Ruth. Okay? I think I misspelled it here. I had it, and I'm not misspelled it. I can't pronounce it. Elimelech. Yeah, I'm missing an L in here somewhere.
It was E-L.
Yeah. Oh, E-L. Never mind. You know who I'm talking about. I haven't practiced this. Okay. Naomi's husband. All right. Sold property. Now, we don't have that in the first 5 verses, but we know because of the context of the whole book of Ruth, we know that Naomi is trying to get her husband's land back, and they can't afford it. So we know that he had to have sold the property. And the whole family, because of the famine, moved to Moab, and then her husband dies. And then the sons married Moabite women, which, if you look in Leviticus, it talks about how they're not supposed to marry a Moabite from 10 generations from where they're at, and they're still within that 10 generation time frame, because the Moabites, they were supposed to be getting rid of, okay? And so they married Moabite women, okay? And then both the sons died. And I'm not going to say it's because they married Moabites, all right? Okay? So before we continue in the book, I want to discuss 2 concepts today so you can be in a pattern of where we're at. You can have a mindset of where we're going, where we're at, that doesn't jump out at you early on. So the first idea is the word chesed, and that's Hebrew, and it means loving kindness or mercy. And you'll see the term in like Nehemiah and Daniel and those prayers they prayed, God whose covenant and mercies. It's relating to this idea of God's mercy and loving kindness, okay? And it has a deep meaning to that. It's really tied to God's mercy and loving kindness, okay? It's kind of like some places it's translated to mercy. Sometimes it's translated to loving kindness. Sometimes it's translated to kindness. But it's this concept that is riddled throughout the Old Testament about mercy and kindness and loving kindness. It implies acting to meet the deep needs of others based on a relationship of commitment and covenant. So in Nehemiah and Daniel, the two, Nehemiah opening chapter, he prays to God, to the God of covenant and who keeps his covenant and mercies. Daniel, in the famous book, chapter 9 of his prophecy, before that he prays, and that's how he opens his prayer, to God, the one who that keeps his covenant and his mercies. Okay, so this idea is a deep meaning that has a relationship. This is why I tell you all the time, your Christian walk is a relationship with God. Okay, God wants a relationship with us, and that's why we build on it, and that's what we see mirrored here in the Old Testament with the idea of chesed. Interestingly enough, though, it's used 248 times in the Old Testament, but it's only 3 times in the book of Ruth. And yet that's what the focus of my message is about the loving kindness and mercy that we have of moms and that we have of God. And also the next thing we'll be talking about next is the kinsman redeemer. Not to that slide yet. So what I wanted to point out about this chesed, the concept of chesed, or loving kindness, mercy, is the focus of the book of Ruth and not the usage of the word. So, like I said, the word is only in the book of Ruth 3 times. But the idea behind God's covenant and mercies and the idea of loving kindness, the idea of mercy, is just riddled through the whole concept behind the book of Ruth. Okay? And then the other word we're going to talk about in the Hebrew is gael, and it's to redeem, act as a kinsman. And how many have heard of kinsman redeemer? Okay, a couple of you. Okay, a kinsman redeemer before I read that bullet point, a kinsman redeemer is somebody that helps out family. So we're going to find out in book of Ruth is that Ruth is going to be meeting up with Boaz, gleaning from his fields, we'll see later, and she finds out he's a kinsman, he's a close relative, so he can act as a kinsman redeemer. And so that's how we know that Elimelech sold his land, because now Boaz is the one in the end of the story, is the one that redeems. So he's a kinsman, a close relative, and he redeems the land of Naomi's so that she can get the land back. Okay? It implies they, the kinsman redeemer, are a more powerful person and will be the one showing the chesed, or the loving kindness, to one who is weaker. And we'll see that in Ruth as we go through it. The other thing is it's done voluntarily. Okay? They want to do it. They desire to do it. They want to be this kinsman redeemer for them. Okay? And then it's used 105 times in the Old Testament and 22 times in Ruth. So think about it. It's about 6 pages. If you have a study Bible, it's about 6 pages out of almost 1,500 in the Old Testament, and it's used 22 times out of the 105 times. Okay, so this whole idea of kinsman redeemer is why are we going here? So this is the other aspect I want to point out about the book of Ruth. In the book of Ruth, chesed, or loving kindness and mercy, lies behind the action of the gael, the redeemer. Okay, where do we see that in the New Testament? Huh? Any guesses? What does everything in the Old Testament point to? It points to Christ, right? And so we're going to see why Christ, one of the reasons Christ came to this earth to be a man, right? And so we're going to talk about, I'll weave in this kinsman redeemer idea, but again, this is what does this have to do with Mother's Day, Mike? Okay? We're going to get there, right? Naomi is the mom we're going to talk about, and I'll explain as we go through why we're talking about her and what she did, okay? So let's read Hebrews chapter 2, verses 10 through 17, because I want to give you the image that Christ is our kinsman redeemer. Christ is this one for us, and I'm going to read through this passage in Hebrews to kind of help you see that concept of kinsman redeemer. It says, starting in verse 10, it says, "For it was fitting for him, Christ, from whom are all things and by whom are all things." The great creator. Christ was there from creation, from the beginning, right? For whom and by whom are all things, right? And the bringing many sons to glory, to make captain of their salvation. So this what's interesting about kinsman redeemer, you won't find that the book of Ruth is a type of Christ written anywhere in the Bible. But as you study the Bible, you'll recognize and understand the idea of kinsman redeemer and how Christ fits that role. Okay, it's a pretty cool thing if I can explain it properly. Okay, so Christ is bringing many sons to glory to make them the captain of their salvation, perfect through sufferings. For both he who sanctifies and those who are being sanctified are all of one. For which reason he is not ashamed to call them brethren. There's the kinsman. There's the relationship. There's where Christ coming down to heaven to be a man. Here's where that kinship begins. We become his brethren. Saying, I will declare your name to my brethren. Right? What did Jesus do when he was on this earth? He declared God to them, right? He did the Father's will. In the midst of the assembly, I will sing praise to you. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, here am I and the children whom God has given me. Again, the kinsman. The kinsman, he's our near relation now. Because he lived as a man, he is our near relation. Inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared the same. He became flesh and blood. And we're going to see even something cooler in this next verse about him becoming flesh and blood. So I skipped half of 14 and 15 for time's sake. But it says, continuing verse 16. Again, Hebrews chapter 2. For indeed he does not give aid to angels. He didn't come to this earth for angels. Angels did not need a redeemer. Angels did not need a kinsman, right? He didn't come to this. Why? But what did he come for? But he does give aid to those of the seed of Abraham, right? The seed of Abraham. Those who accept that he's our kinsman and he's our redeemer. That's who he came to. Because get this, he had to be made like his brethren. He had to. He wanted to. He desired to. He wanted to come to this earth because he loved us. But for this plan that God put in place starting way back in the Old Testament, Christ had to become a man. He had to become like his brethren, right? That he might be a merciful and faithful high priest. That was the primary purpose, faithful high priest. But this kinsman redeemer associates in with that because it says, in things pertaining to God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. Now, propitiation is just a fancy way to say that appeasement. To get in good graces with God. So Christ was our kinsman redeemer to put us back in good graces with God and appease God's wrath towards us, a sinful creature, right? So that's what makes Christ our kinsman redeemer. Okay, so let's get back on track. Okay, so the first 5 verses of Ruth, remember what we found out. We found out that Naomi's husband sold their property because of the famine. They went and they moved to Moab. Then her husband died. And then the sons married Moabite women, and both sons died. So that leaves Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth. Okay, and so we're going to cover about Naomi. I've come up with a silly acronym or acrostic for mom. Okay. And the first one, the M, and I blanked out some of that on purpose, you might be able to read it, is models. Mothers, they model. They live your life so that people want the God you serve. And more specifically, we're going to see for even when you're not enjoying life, okay? And then O is for orders. You know, I couldn't find a better one, but orders. But moms do order their kids around, or they try to, right? And so Naomi instructed Ruth in the ways of the Lord, and we're going to see that in the book of Ruth. And so that's the same thing we should be doing. And then merriment, contentment and joy in the supporting role. That's the title of the message, the supporting role, playing that supporting role. Mothers play the supporting role in their children's lives. And I say that repeatedly because not all mothers like playing the supporting role. They want to play the lead role, right? They want to dictate how their children live because they have ideas how they want that child to turn out, okay? So first one we're going to go over is model. Live your life so that even in the times you feel bitter, people still want the God you serve. What are you talking about? Let's look at the next verses. So again, her husband, her sons died. She's got these 2 daughter-in-laws with her. She is getting ready. She says, I'm going back home. I'm going to Bethlehem. I've had enough, right? And she's even said she's had more than enough because he says, But Naomi said to Orpah and Ruth, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb that they may be your husbands?" Because that was Jewish culture, that if your son died and was married, then the next son is supposed to come up and take care of that wife and marry her, okay? It says, "For I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband tonight and should also bear sons." Here's where we're getting the core of what Naomi's going through. If I should say I have hope. You don't say something like that unless you don't have hope, right? If I should say I have hope. If I should have a husband and also bear sons. Would you wait for them till they were grown? Okay, talking to Orpah and Ruth. Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? Naomi says, "No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone against me." Anybody ever feel like the hand of the Lord has gone against you? Things just aren't going right and just bad things happen and you're just like, "God, are you really there?" That's the way Naomi was feeling, okay? And so we continue on though, but what does Ruth do? This is where I'm saying we model the behavior. And before I read these verses, because it's one of the most famous verses in the book of Ruth, is I want to explain what I'm talking about when I say model. Because what is the state of mind of Naomi right now? She's already sorrowful. She's already hurting. She's already lost family. She's ready to move back. And yet still she had to have lived some type of witness. Because we're going to see she was bitter as well. I had a time trying to figure out where I wanted to start my acrostic. But is that we're going to find out how bad off Naomi felt she was, okay? But what does Ruth say to her when she tells her to get lost? When Naomi says, "Don't come with me. I don't have nothing else for you. I'm done. The Lord has put his hand against me. Just back away. Don't come near," right? But Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." How's that for a witness to somebody that you pick up in Moab that married your son, they died, and she's trying to kick him to the curb, so to speak, because she's just miserable, not because she doesn't like him, but something happened in Moab that Ruth, as the daughter, says, "No, I ain't going. Don't make me leave, because wherever you're going, that's where I'm going. And wherever you live, that's where I'm going to live. And your people shall be my people, and better yet, your God will be my God," right? So where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. And listen to how committed Ruth is. Based on the model behavior that Naomi gave her, it says, "The Lord do so to me and more also, if anything but death parts you and me." She is committed to Naomi. Something the way that we don't have that story. We don't have that background on what happened in Moab, except we had 3 deaths and 2 marriages, and now they're going back. That's all we have in the first 5 verses. But something happened that Ruth, after all this, is willing to sit there and say, "I'm going with you. I'm not leaving you. I want your God." She ended that statement, "Your God will be my God." She saw God in Naomi. Okay? And we're going to see how bitter and how hard and hurt that Naomi is, but still Ruth followed her. It says, "Now the 2 of them went until they came to Bethlehem." Okay? And it happened when they came to Bethlehem that all the city was excited because of them. And the woman said, "Is this Naomi? Look, she's been gone, how long? Remember? 10 years, at least. 10 years she's been gone, maybe even longer. And she's come back to Bethlehem. The whole town's like, wow, cool, Naomi's back." And here's, you want to talk about a party pooper there, Doris? Here's the party pooper, right? But Naomi said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me." Okay? She is feeling so down and out. She is feeling so sad, so grieving, so sorrowful that she's bitter. Right? She's bitter. And even Mara, this word Mara means bitter, and it's the only place it's used in the Bible. Okay? Naomi is like bitter against God, right? The Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me, okay? And so, even despite that, we still have Ruth that tagged along with her. Okay? She's even saying, I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me? Okay, I think she had a right to be a party pooper a little bit, right? Okay, so it's this idea that even though we're on the M for model, she modeled something to Ruth, that Ruth still went with her despite her talking like this. Can you imagine the trip from Moab to Bethlehem, and it's just the two of them? You know, it makes you wonder how much more bitterness came out of Naomi on that trip back to Bethlehem, right? But Ruth still wanted to be part of who she was. So the next one is orders. So Naomi, throughout the book of Ruth, instructs Ruth in the ways of the Lord, and as we should for others. So we're going to jump in ahead, and we're going to be in chapter 2, verse 19. But they're poor. They don't have anything. Their husband had sold their property. So in order to make bread and everything, they have to go glean the fields. And what that means is the Jews had a rule and a law that if we had tractors back then, you know how a tractor can't make such a tight corner that you have that little area that doesn't get harvested, and there's overlap and things along the road edge and stuff that they don't harvest. They're not supposed to go back there and try to collect that, because that's for the widows and the poor. That's what they go to make their bread and get their bread. And so Naomi sends Ruth out to do that. Ruth goes, and she had already met Boaz. I'm giving this is a Reader's Digest condensed version of the book of Ruth. Okay? And so she goes, and she meets up with Boaz's people, and she gets a good, healthy handful that you usually don't get from gleaning. Okay? Because Boaz filled up her bag or something. Okay? So after that happens, this is where we step in back into the book of Ruth. It says, and her mother-in-law said to her, Naomi, or Mara, said to her, makes you wonder, because that's the only place in the Bible, I sometimes wondered if any of the townsfolk listened to her and called her Mara. I know, does that keep anybody else up at night? All right, so anyway, because throughout the book of Ruth, everybody still calls her Naomi. It says, and where did you work? Blessed be the one who took notice of you. So she told her mother, so Ruth told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked, and said, the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. Okay? So here we have the next player coming into the picture. Then continuing verse 20, Naomi starting to plot and scheme in a good way. She's being the typical mother or mother-in-law, like making sure that, how many mothers in here have been played matchmaker? Okay. I won't say who got pointed out. I kind of doubt that, I think some of you don't either want to admit it or you don't want to take credit for it or something, but I haven't met very few women that don't try to be matchmakers, okay? But anyway, I'm probably going to get myself in trouble. So then Naomi said to her daughter, blessed be he of the Lord who has not forsaken his kindness to the living and the dead. I love this because it caught me. I thought it was a misprint at first. Blessed be he of the Lord who has not forsaken the Lord's kindness to the living and the dead. In other words, Naomi is saying about Boaz, blessed be Boaz of the Lord. She's saying the Lord sent him because of how much she benefited Ruth and gave her the extra barley or wheat or whatever they were harvesting. And so she's saying he's doing what he's supposed to. He's a good Christian man. He's doing what he's supposed to, right? That's always critical, right? For your woman making a matchmaker, he's a Christian man or woman, okay? That's free. And it says, and Naomi said to her, this is where the plotting comes in, scheming. This man is a relation of ours, one of our close relatives. He's a kinsman, okay? Ruth the Moabitess said, he also said to me, you shall stay close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. So Ruth has already caught Boaz's eye, right? He's already like, Ruth, okay? All right, and so continuing on, it says, then and Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, again, continuing with the plan that's ticking away in her brain to help Ruth out. It says, "It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, and that people do not meet you in any other field." In other words, when the gleaning's poor, you go to the next field, or when you might find something better, or if it's getting too crowded. But Naomi's telling Ruth, stick to this guy, right? Stay with him. You've already caught his eye. He's already helped you, so keep going, right? So she stayed close by the young women of Boaz to glean until the end of barley harvest and wheat harvest, and she dwelt with her mother-in-law. Okay, so she continued on day after day of the harvest, right? Okay, now we're going to jump to chapter 3, because the harvest is now over, but they still have to winnow the harvest. Okay, they still got to thresh it, or whatever you call it. I'm not a farmer. You guys will know that very quickly if I don't use the right language up here. But the time has come now that they're now threshing the wheat, okay, or the barley. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, shall I not seek security for you, that it may be well with you?" Here's where she's starting to talk about the match. She's finally letting Ruth in on her plan, okay? And what's the plan? It says, "Now Boaz, whose young women you were with, is he not our relative? In fact, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Therefore, wash yourself and anoint yourself, put on your best garment, and go down to the threshing floor." As my dad would say, she told her to get gussied up. I don't even know. Anybody ever heard the term gussied before? Okay, well, at least I'm in my realm a little bit, but I never as a kid really understood what gussied meant except something good, okay? So Naomi told Ruth, get dressed up, put on your best, okay? And then go down to the threshing floor. She said, "But do not make yourself known to the man, Boaz, until he has finished eating and drinking. Then it shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do." Naomi obviously thought this out. No, make sure he's in a good mood, make sure this, make sure that, make sure he's tired, okay? And I want you to know, some people, and I totally disagree with them, some people try to play this out that she was telling Ruth to act promiscuous. And I don't believe that in the slightest. Boaz was a man of integrity, and Ruth, it was something culturally that was acceptable to do and was not bad, okay? And so Naomi is telling Ruth to do this, okay? And then in verse 5 it says, "And she, Ruth, said to her, 'All that you say to me I will do.' So she went down to the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law instructed her," or ordered her, okay? Ordered is a strong word, but I needed a no, not an I for mom. Okay, and so she instructed her what to do, and Ruth recognized the wisdom of her instruction, and she did it, okay? And so we go through a whole couple chapters or another chapter in Ruth where Boaz takes notice of her. He goes to the city gates to say he's going to claim that he's her kinsman, and so he can redeem her, the property, the farm, but there's somebody closer. And I love it because that's part of the story I don't have time to read. But Boaz says, okay, there's somebody else, and he offers her. He says, "Oh, do you want to redeem her farm?" And the other guy was like, "Yeah, I'll redeem it." And Boaz was like, "Yeah, but you got to marry her too." And the other guy was like, "Nope, sorry, never mind." Right? So Boaz got to redeem the property, and he got to have Ruth as his wife. And so that gives us to the merriment of mom. The merriment, contentment and joy in the supporting role. Again, Naomi, she's littered through the book, but the book's not named after Naomi, it's named after Ruth, okay? Naomi's not the primary person, the primary actor in this story, but she's definitely a big part of the story, right? And so contentment and joy in the supporting role. Okay, and so we see in chapter 4, the last 4 verses of chapter 4, the closing of the book of Ruth, it says, "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he went into her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a close relative, a kinsman redeemer. So he was a kinsman, and by paying the property cost, he became the redeemer. That's what Christ did for our sins. He paid the cost of our sins, and that's why we have this beautiful analogy of what we see in the book of Ruth, that we can compare it to what Christ did for all of humanity. He had to become like his brethren. He had to, because he is our kinsman redeemer. Okay? And so even the women have recognized it, because blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a close relative. Okay? And may he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. And it continues. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons. Right? Think about that. So not only was Ruth willing to follow Naomi, but then Naomi, despite, call me bitter, I'm just bitter. Sorry, I'm bitter. Who are you? I'm bitter. Okay? That's the way she was. But Ruth still followed her instruction, and still came through. And this is what the women are saying. Ruth, you got a good one. Right? You got a good daughter-in-law. She stuck with you, and she's better than 7 sons. Then look at what we see that happens. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her bosom and became a nurse to him. Also the neighbor woman gave him a name, saying, there is a son born to Naomi, and they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Okay, remember I told you that, they weren't supposed to marry Moabites? Well, sometimes God allows our mistakes and still his plan comes through. Because this is David, King David, the line of Christ. You'll see Boaz listed in the genealogy of Christ in Matthew chapter 1. Okay, so there is a son born to Obed. So Naomi is the great-grandma to David. Okay, Naomi, bitter Naomi. Thought life was over, thought it was no purpose. She probably was like, why am I even bothering going to Bethlehem? Why can't I just lay down and die here, right? No, she went back, and then God blessed her and honored her by instructing Ruth, being a model to Ruth, and then she gained the joy of being that. Okay? And so that leads me, we'll review the so what that we've seen earlier. Remember mom. Models. Live your life so that, and this is for everybody, that's why I say it's not just for moms, it's for everybody. Live your life so that even in the times you feel bitter, people still want the God you serve. Right? That's a hard thing. That's a hard sell. But when God can handle us getting upset. He handled it with Naomi. He can handle us getting mad at him. And he sits back and waits until we get our head on straight and recognize it. But he allows that. And so, but live your life so that even when you have a bad day, people don't sink your witness because they know that normally, oh, you must be having a bad day. Right? So recognize that and live your life so people want that. And then orders. Instruct your daughters and others in the ways of the Lord. Okay, that's what Naomi did for Ruth. She instructed her, do this, do that, behave this way, even down to how to do the gleaning and the whole idea of kinsman redeemer, all that stuff. Okay, and then merriment. Rejoice in the successes of your children's lives. You helped get them there. Okay, and this is where I want to go to a reminder here about the supporting role. In the movie of your child or children, you are just a supporting character. You may not get the Oscar for Best Actor, but maybe one for Best Supporting Role is even better, right? We often want to live, we don't want our kids to make our mistakes, and we can sometimes be a little hard on them because we don't, and dictate to them, and don't do this, and don't be like that, because we do want what's better for them. But we can't take over that role. We can't take the lead part in their lives. We just can't. And so that leads me to my point to ponder that says, does your witness carry on through the difficult times? Are you content to represent a supporting role in the movie of your children, or do you try to be the lead? Okay? And then for next week, continue memorizing Ephesians 4, verse 16. Read Hebrews chapter 2 and see the familial relationship that we read, verses 10 through 18, that we have in Christ. And then as extra credit, read the book of Ruth. Like I said, it's like 4 pages. It's very small. It'll take you 15 minutes, and it's a cool story, right? And it's not a story, it's real. So it's a cool telling of what happened in history in the line of Christ.